Today we have another video on something writing craft related. So it's like I'm returning to my roots, which is pretty cool. Namely, I want to talk about the difference between character goal, character motivation, and character's need, right? So yeah, character's goal, character's motivation, and character's need. This is a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, and I just never got around to it. The main reason for it being that I've seen a lot of people conflate these terms, especially character's goal and motivation. And like a lot of people on the internet, including some like writing coaches and people like that. And, it's fine because at the end of the day, this terminology is just like the whole point is to help you create a cool story, right? This is not like whether you use the right terminology or not doesn't matter, but there are some things, like there are still reasons why we use these words and why I feel it can be very useful to pay attention to your character's goal and motivation and need. And it can also sometimes be very useful to be able to differentiate between these ideas so that like you can see what's going on in your story. Sometimes maybe, something is a little bit off and you think that you have established the goal and the motivation, but you've only established the goal, perhaps, that's what like comes through from the story itself. So let's get to it. The character trifecta: goal, motivation, need. Pow. So let's start with the goal. Why do we even have a goal? Why do characters need to have a goal? I feel like this is one of the most common, feedback critiques, especially for beginner writers, like myself included. I've heard these 1,000 times when I first started like writing more seriously, and I still do. Like, this is still something that can easily slip through our fingers. The goal, like, what does this character actually want? What is this character's goal? Blah, 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 blah. And I feel like every writer also at some point gets a bit tired of hearing that. Like, okay, not every character needs a goal. Well, they kind of do. They kind of do if you want your story to have a sense of direction. That's the idea, right? Of course, there are different ways of writing. You do as you wish, and I would suggest that instead of just deciding, I want my characters to never have a goal, or like, I want my characters to have a goal, I would really advise you to play around with that, especially if this is something that gets on your nerves, because usually, I would say 99% of the time, when the characters don't have a goal in a certain play or screenplay or story, any kind of story, it's because the writers didn't know how to establish one. It's because the writers didn't really know what they wanted. It's because the writers didn't really do their job. And it's not because that is a deliberate, intentional decision on their part, which can happen, of course, like we said, but there is a difference between characters not having any, like characters just like kind of floating around being like, I don't really know, because you didn't really know how to establish a goal, versus characters floating around, blah, 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 because that was your intentional stylistic decision. That's just my opinion on that. But of course, why do characters even like often need to have a goal, it's because that gives the story a sense of direction. It's like we know where we are going, we know we have a path ahead of us, and it might be a bumpy ride. And it's also going to make it pretty clear what we're working towards, and it's going to make it clear like whether or not we succeeded, whether or not the characters succeeded in attaining their goal or not. So what is a goal? It's just literally something that character wants. That's it. That is it. And that's why also often people make way too big of a deal about this, because it can literally be just like, hey, I just want to go home and relax. Like that can be a goal. Or of course, a goal can be, getting a romantic partner or saving the world. And another thing worth mentioning, characters' goals can change throughout the story. So like I said, the main point is having direction so that we know like what is even kind of the point of what we're watching, right? So for example, if we look at Shrek, let's just take that because it's a nice example that I think most of us are familiar with. So of course, his like overarching goal, the main goal, let's say, especially like at the beginning and throughout the entire story, is to get his swamp back, right? But that's not his goal since like the 00000 when the movie starts, right? In the beginning, we can see that he wants just to be left alone, basically. And then when the creatures come, he wants to get his swamp back. And then, okay, what does he have to do for that, right? So then we have these like smaller goals within this whole journey, which is first he needs to get to the place, I forgot what it's called, that place, where Lord Farquaad is, right? And then, he makes a deal with Lord Farquaad that if he brings him Fiona, then he can get his swamp back. And so now his goal is to save Fiona. Okay? So you see how this gives us a sense of, okay, this is going on now. This is the direction we're going, and like on the way, in Shrek's case, that's literally the direction. Like also they actually walk, have an actual literal journey, but it doesn't have to be like a literal journey, but it just gives us a sense of, okay, where is this story going? What are we working towards? And of course, we will know whether he succeeded or not when we see if he saves Fiona or not. And of course, later, his goal is to tell Fiona how he feels, blah, 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 blah. This can change. And you can see that as soon as we sort of resolve one goal, then we get another one, right? And again, because that kind of lets us know this is where the story is going, and that's also kind of how it is in real life, right? I'm not even talking about some like insatiable desire to constantly pursue things, but it's like, oh, okay, maybe I'm hungry, and then you make lunch, and then you're like, maybe now I want to go for a little walk, right? And we have these little micro goals constantly. Anyway, so yeah, that would be the goal. The goal is basically what the character wants for whatever reason. This is just like what we are working towards, and this can of course be, an internal goal, external goal, whatever. There's like a whole, there's a whole video there just to talk about goals, but we're not gonna go into that right now. We're going to talk about motivation now. Now, this is going to sound so obvious, but I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people like say, oh, my character's goal is, I don't know, to win a competition. And why? What is the motivation? Oh, because she wants to win the competition. Okay, and that's not motivation. You're just rephrasing the goal, right? Do you see that? And again, like, this may sound, it's always like this when we're talking about something. It may sound really obvious, like, of course that's not the same thing, because for motivation we need to know the reason why they want what they want, right? But why I am talking about this at all is because so often when we're writing, this can very easily happen, right? We're maybe not entirely sure why exactly the character wants to go there, and so we're like, well, yeah, she just like really, really wants that. And yeah, that's not, I mean, it's great, it's awesome if you can create a story where your character like really, really wants to achieve their goal, but why is another matter. And you can have stories that feel a bit where the audience can feel a bit, I didn't really understand why, Of course, not having a goal can be a bit of a problem, but then not having a sense of motivation is like another thing. So, for example, why does Shrek want to save Fiona? Here we can say because he wants his swan back, and this was the deal that he made with Lord Farquaad, right? Even though here it's a bit of a cop-out because, we answered this goal with another goal. But then we can look at, okay, why does he want his swan back? Because that's kind of his main goal of the whole thing. And here we can get into, because he really enjoys, or so he thinks, we'll get to that when we're talking about the need, because he really enjoys being by himself, because he's really, really annoyed by some creatures being in his swamp, right? He has his own space and he likes it and he feels comfortable there, and he really, really hates it when there are other creatures there and he does not feel comfortable around them, and he does not get along well with plenty of other creatures, okay? Now that is his motivation for why he wants his goal to get his swan back. And as you've probably noticed while I was talking about this, all of this, like his motivation is shown in the film itself. That's why it's a great example, because it's a great movie. It's not so much explained. Like, of course, there are moments when you also mentioned this in dialogues, but you also see, you see his frustrations. You see all the ways and all the examples in which these creatures being in his house and in his swamp annoy him. And also before that, you could see that he really enjoys his own, solitude, his own company, basically. So now that we have the goal and the motivation down, we totally get what this is, we have it up here. When we're writing, that's perhaps a different story, but hopefully we'll be able to, reflect on our own writing with this awareness as well. But right, so now we have the goal and the motivation, and now we come to the need. Now, the need is something that I don't really feel like you need, pun not intended, you don't really need to consciously include it. Perhaps that's going against some writing advice. perhaps this is very aligned with some other writing advice, I feel like paying attention to the need and like really focusing on, oh, what does this character subconsciously want? And, because what need is this goal going to fulfill in his own mind or whatever? I feel like this is like a bit of a, 20th and also 21st century type of thing when we're also, as like humans getting more into psychology and like psychoanalysis and analyzing our thoughts and emotions and blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. But even leaving that, so like I would definitely not recommend that you go full on, Freud on your characters, just like let them be, okay? You are not a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, unless you are, well, in which case you are, but like mostly especially when you're writing, you're not a psychoanalyst, you're an artist, okay? And so the idea, I feel, is to just have enough empathy and understanding, like, and emotional intelligence, to also see that most often, your characters want something which might not actually be the best for them. Or they might want something for, let's say, the wrong reasons, right? Because they want to prove themselves, or because they want to, like, for example, Elle Woods, when she goes into Harvard, it's because she wants to be with the guy, right? She wants to win the guy back. She doesn't go to Harvard because she wants to actually be a law student. Or maybe the character wants something because they believe this is going to help them, I don't know, feel good about themselves or be happy ever after or blah, 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 whatever. And, or they believe that this will finally, cure their, I don't know, depression, whatever. And it's on us to kind of like know that that's perhaps not always the case, right? And usually the story is probably more interesting if the goal that your character is pursuing turns out to be not the best thing for them or the world or whatever. So like if they just like realize something about it, right? Does that make sense? And here is where we encounter the need, which would be like the emotional, psychological need that this character has. Sometimes also you can see this as a lack. So something in their world, when we have in the beginning, the ordinary world, there's something that is missing from there, right? And again, you can play with like how aware your character is of that, but usually the goal that they're after is not directly addressing that lack. But throughout the story, they will probably need to realize that, oh, they've been focusing on the wrong thing, and what they truly needed was this other thing. And then, they can gather their courage and pursue this, or they can also like double down on their own false beliefs and kind of go down the opposite road. Yeah, so the need kind of refers to some sort of emotional lack of the character, and ideally they're not really aware of that, but throughout the story they realize that at a certain point. So for example, we were talking about Shrek, of course. Here we can see that he believes that he has this amazing life because he enjoys being a bit of a hermit and, just living by himself, enjoying his swamp life. And then it turns out that this was all kind of his way of coping or dealing with the fact that he believes everyone only sees him as an ugly ogre and judges him, and that no one could ever like truly care about him. And it also, so like there's him believing that no one could ever truly care about him, and also he of course is kind of very guarded and afraid to tell someone else that they, or show someone else that they care about them, for, you know, for the same reason basically, and out of fear of getting hurt. And this is kind of this need for connection, for also being understood and connecting with other creatures, having a friend, and of course also ultimately having a romantic love, a romantic partnership. That's where his need was, that he wasn't aware of in the beginning. Yeah, and that's it. That's it. I know, again, like I said, these may sound obvious, but when we are writing, and especially I feel like this is good to evaluate after you already have your first draft behind you, you know, and then you can ask yourself, okay, what does this character actually want? You know, why do they want it? Oh, is there something that they need that they're not aware of? Blah, 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 blah. All of these kinds of questions. And yeah, if this is something that you can feel maybe you could work on a little bit, a good practice is also just like next time that you're reading something or watching a movie or watching a TV show, paying attention to these things and really trying to get clear on especially motivation, right? Because this one is tricky. Again, sounds obvious, but so many people can miss it. I don't know why. It's because when you're like watching something or when you're writing something, you're really in that world, right? So it actually makes perfect sense. But yeah, and for you to really be able to separate the goal and the motivation and the need and blah, 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 these kind of analysis, you really need to be able to, you know, take a step back and look at the different components of the whole plot structure, and especially the character development, because these are really the three of the most important things about a character, right? It's not like what are his hobbies and what does he like to do, blah, 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 blah. No, these are the points that really make a character besides their decisions, and we'll get into that in some other video. And these are also the points that connect the character and the plot, and that's why they're so important, really, which is also why I wanted to make a video about them. So if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if this is something that seems just blatantly obvious to you, or if you can see that, like, yeah, when you're writing, sometimes it's hard to establish the goal, establish the motivation, show the motivation, find the need, or maybe like whatever, you know, just write whatever you want in the comments if you want to write something. Thank you so much for watching. I feel like there's more videos on creative writing craft coming. That's what I'm feeling in the air. That's the weather forecast for this channel, but we'll see. So if you want to tag along, then subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.